Today's episode is about 5 communication strategies for handling someone who talks over you or interrupts you. This has been a hot topic of discussion in the speaking engagements where I've been and in the trainings that I have done. So many people, particularly women, are asking this question of more strategies for how to deal with this. And in fact, when I was speaking for Accelerate Women Leaders in Travel in New Hampshire in April, I remember the thing that happened with we decided to do a role play basically. And because somebody said, "How do you deal with that?" And I will tell you, this woman gave me a run for my money. So when I practice with people, because in the live audience, somebody asked, how do you handle this? And I said, "Do you want to do a practice right now?" And she said, "Not really," which was very honest. But then I said, "Okay, it doesn't have to be you. Would somebody else be willing to do a role play with me?" And the nice thing is, when I do role plays with people, I typically start by having them be the person, like, well, in other words, I'm the ideal person. I'm them. When I say ideal person, I just mean that I am the one that's required to do the work on how to respond. So in this case, she pretended that she was John. We'll call her John, and she was interrupting me. So the test was, could I bring my skills to life in front of 100 people at this retreat for women leaders in travel? Well, it turned out to go really, really, we were laughing. She was the best interrupter. She gave me a run for my money. Okay. So what happened was we pretended I was starting to talk about something related to strategy with the company, just making it up. And then she interrupts me. And what was interesting is that I looked at her and said, "John," I said, "Hey, I'm just about done here," and then go for it after that. And then she said, "Let's do a quick timeout here in the role play." She goes, "Most of the time when someone interrupts, they're not looking at the person speaking. They're looking at the people in the room. So trying to get their attention, well, maybe not, sometimes they don't have to, sadly, because a lot of times people will listen more to men who are speaking, unfortunately." And so we did it again, where she started looking out at the audience as if they were the meeting attendees. And then I had to do more work because she wasn't actually looking at me. Well, she as the he in this case. So we did it again. And I said, "John, hold on here. I'm in the middle of what I'm talking about. Give me a second." And obviously, it's got to depend on the relationship that you have. You've got good judgment and common sense. That always has to override anything that I might share with you as tips. Of course, I've got tips that I have found to work with my clients and I've tried over the years as well. But at the end of the day, you've got to be the best judge to determine, is this something that I want to do in this situation? Do I think that this is going to be a good place to experiment, to practice, and do I want to speak up? Because sometimes, sadly, there are repercussions for speaking up that we might not want to deal with. But I am always a fan of speaking up and especially being in a place where someone honors your voice. And if you're not in a place where somebody honors your voice, I would suggest you think about potentially going elsewhere. So in this role play, she kept coming back. Man, she was just firing back and interrupting me and interrupting me. And I finally just said, "John, hold on a second. This is getting hilarious. Give me a moment, and then you can have the floor." So we ended up stopping there. But you don't want to also escalate too much. The main thing is to try to keep it light. But let me walk through these 5 strategies, and then I'll talk a little bit more and throw in some other examples here, hopefully. First step is to hold your ground calmly but firmly. This is often the hardest one because when we are in the moment, as you know, when you're in the moment and you're pissed, you're mad, like, why did this person interrupt me? That's so rude. So it can throw us off. And then when we're thrown off, our nervous system might be dysregulated. And if we're dysregulated, we are not going to be in a place to make the best decisions. And therefore, we might not be representing ourselves in the best way possible, in which case we might end up throwing out a snarky remark or saying nothing at all, just shutting down and freezing. So something just to keep in mind there. So what I would suggest how you do this is when you're interrupted, typically I would pause briefly. or just interrupt back and say, I'd like to finish, I'd like to finish my thought before moving on. Or saying, I wasn't quite done with my point. As soon as I'm done, I'll turn it over to you. Those are some things that I would recommend. And remembering to use a neutral tone, even more a little friendly lightness in your facial expression as well, and have the assertive authority in your voice. So you're saying it with conviction, but you've got either a smile or a lightness to your expression, and certainly a lightness in your tone. Because the last thing you want to do is say, I wasn't quite done yet, or I want to finish my thoughts. What's really important, and this is what's so hard as women, we have such a tightrope to walk. It is such a double bind where the double standard, that kind of thing, it's so tough. And yet, that is the reality that we are living in. So we need to play the game for better or worse. So this is where I would recommend focusing on a couple other things. So I already gave you some examples of, I'd like to finish my thought. I wasn't quite done with my point. It could be something like, hey, in just a moment, I'll turn it over to you. And that can be helpful to also showcase that when you say things like you'll have a turn in a second or something like that, you have to be careful with that. But sometimes that can create this great power dynamic of I'm giving you permission to or I'm in control right now and determining who is speaking at this moment, which is me. So all of this is the nuanced underlying thing that's happening when we're in these moments. But it is so hard. This is also why I highly recommend that you have a coach or a friend to practice these things with. This is what we do in the Powerhouse, my group of executive women that meets twice a month. We practice scenarios like this so that we are ready in the moments where it is a high stakes situation and we don't want to lose our cool, but we also want to hold our ground. So it can be tough to have that balance for sure of that warmth and assertiveness, but you do want to have both. That's number one. Number two is to have a private conversation. If this is a pattern, especially, even to say something like, hey, John, I've noticed, I'm not sure if you're aware of it, but I've noticed that I'm often interrupted during our discussions or in meetings. You may not realize it, but you interject quite a bit. And this, by the way, thinking about word choice is so helpful. Think about using the word interject instead of interrupt. It's a softer, just less, just there's a better feel to interjecting versus interrupting. Even though we know it's interrupting, saying interjecting somehow just feels friendlier. So that would be what I'd recommend so that you can get a better result in that conversation. So something like I'd like to have the chance to fully express my ideas in the time allotted. And or you could say something like, hey, could I get your support on this? By the way, another very powerful tip, which is something that I learned from the communication expert Jefferson Fisher, is to front load a conversation that might be difficult with, I'd like your help, or I need your help. John, I need your help on something. We as human beings are wired to be problem solvers. So when you say, I need your help on this, their problem solving mode goes up. And what also is fascinating about human beings is that we tend to like people better when they ask us for help. Isn't that ironic? And how often do we, especially as women, fear asking for help because we don't want to seem to be a bother. We don't want to look like we don't know what we're doing. And yet it actually has the adverse effect. So remember that asking is actually very helpful for relationships. So saying, I need your help on something. Hey, I've noticed a pattern in meetings, probably guessing you're not even aware of it, but there seems to be a pattern that I've noticed is that most of the time that I'm speaking, you tend to interject. Are you aware of that? And see what the person has to say. And then, of course, if they are aware, then you've got to have a different conversation. But to say, hey, either way, get to the solution of I'd really like to be like, it throws me off when anybody interrupts me. And so I'm going to ask you to avoid that in the future. Could we work together on that? Could I get your support? Can I get your help on that? So I would try that because that approach avoids any awkwardness in a meeting where you might be fired up emotionally and you want to retort back when somebody interrupts. So that just addresses the issue independently, and hopefully that will help to solve the problem. I also recognize it is challenging when somebody is like higher up than you, for lack of a better phrase, but maybe it's your boss or maybe it's your boss's boss. So you've got to determine strategically how to actually have that conversation and if it is in fact something that you want to have. But I will say if there is a pattern, I would definitely recommend saying something for sure. Number three, use body language strategically. So remember, whether you're in a virtual meeting or in person, sitting up. So having that speaking posture, leaning into the table if it's a meeting, or if you're standing, making sure that you are standing with a solid posture with your weight evenly distributed on both feet. Making sure when you're seated that you have your hands lightly rested on the table. It can even be your wrists. It doesn't have to be your full hands, but your wrists lightly rested on the table. And even having a gentle hand gesture up, like you don't want to like push somebody away, like give them the hand, but having your gesture go up a little bit when, hey, John, I'm almost done here. And then you can go next. That can help to indicate that you're still speaking. And let's face it, sometimes a nonverbal cue can really effectively communicate that you haven't finished your point. So sometimes you don't even have to say something back verbally, it can be in your body language. So something to consider there. And number four is to maintain your speaking rhythm. I cannot emphasize this one enough. You don't want to be shouting back at the person. I know that sounds weird. Well, of course, I'm not going to be shouting at work, but slightly increasing your volume and maintaining the same speaking rhythm can help to showcase your authority, command the space, and also show, hey, I'm not done yet. And you don't want to be yelling, but just speaking a little bit louder and continuing to speak. Sometimes this subtle vocal adjustment signals your intention to finish your thought and discourages interruption. Also, keep in mind that your speaking rhythm starts from the moment that you begin to speak at a meeting. If you start speaking hesitantly and with like halting in your speech and you've got some filler words in there, or you're quiet when you start speaking, all of those are indicators that you do not have the leadership quality to move things forward. So people won't trust you as much, and maybe they'll feel more inclined to interrupt you because they don't trust that you are going to do whatever you are doing as a leader. You just maybe don't come across as much of a leader. So this is a hard truth for some people, and this is where we don't often know unless you record yourself. So I highly recommend that you record yourself, even audio. It doesn't always have to be video as much as that would be ideal, but sometimes just hearing your voice can give you a much better idea of how you're coming across, because there's oftentimes this disparity gap of how you think you're coming across versus how you actually are coming across. And that's important to know in advance. Number five is to enlist an ally. If interruptions occur or you're afraid that they're going to occur, ask in advance of somebody that you trust that's going to be in the room to intervene. So maybe it's something like, hey, it sounds like, Karen wasn't quite finished with her point. I'd love to hear the rest of it. Or, wow, Karen, you're making really great points. I'd love to hear. I'd love to hear what else you have to say. So that third party support can be really helpful, especially if there's a power dynamic at play. Of course, you don't want to have anybody coddling you or fragilizing you in these meetings, but if you can have somebody who is encouraging participation, that's even better. And then, of course, almost goes without saying, but make sure that you also are listening to people, that you are contributing based on things that they're saying. So you're acknowledging comments, you're complimenting when appropriate. And that's going to make them feel more connected to you, and your status is automatically going to go up because they're going to like you more and think, oh, she always gives me kudos for things that I say. So hopefully that respect then will be reciprocated. So again, let's repeat these. Number five, hold your ground calmly but firmly. Two, have a private conversation. Three, use body language strategically. Four, maintain your speaking rhythm. Five, enlist an ally. So those are our 5 tips. And always remember, you can go to my website and grab the 9 words to avoid and what to say instead, which is a free guide. And by the way, if you sign up for that, and also if you already have that and you just want to go onto my website, I produce tips every week on communication and confidence that I send to the people that are on my list. So if you're looking to raise your communication game and have more influence, please feel free to sign up for that. Even if you have the 9 words, well, you'll still be on my list then. But ultimately, want anybody to know here that you are welcome in my community. And I am so excited to continue serving you to help you have the most compelling, like basically to come across as a clear and compelling communicator. I mean, that's what we all want, right? We want to be seen and heard and be influential and well liked. So have a wonderful rest of your day.